Yes, welcome back to the channel, people. And today we're doing another tactical player analysis, and we're going to be taking a look at a player who I feel is criminally underrated for his team by the wider football society, and that is Fermin Lopez. Made in La Masia, as you guys can of course see on the screen. Well, I say made in La Masia. To be fair, he was, coming through between 2012 and 2016 at Real Betis, and then of course, just like Gavi, moved on to Barcelona. Now, of course, as we know, when you're coming through at Barcelona, it's almost like you have to go through a little bit of a test first and foremost. And I guess fortunately, unfortunately for him, fortunately in terms of his game time, he came through at a time at Barcelona where, Barcelona were kind of all over the gaff, in terms of where they were going as a football club, what their kind of style was, what they were trying to do moving forward. So he's kind of him alongside a few other players are kind of the beneficiary of Barcelona realizing that they had to go back to their roots. And I think they had shied away from that for such a long time, having players like Griezmann and, players of that kind of ilk, into the team. Brilliant players, of course, but it just wasn't really the Barcelona way. He had a lot of players who were just sitting on really, really crazy wages, and it just wasn't really working out. And once they realized that they needed to go back to what it was that made them the team that they, inevitably came, I think players like Fermin Lopez, like Gavi, like a few others, Balde, etc., they were the beneficiary of that. And Fermin, in these last two seasons has been absolutely phenomenal. Now, of course, when we're looking at like his positioning, it's always quite difficult, I always feel, with someone like him in terms of what kind of category would you put him into? Because, on the team sheet on paper, he is technically an attacking midfielder, someone who can, play behind Lewandowski. And I think he can do that really, really well. But he is more what I would say he's like the modern day Barcelona midfielder, someone who can, and this is why I feel like he works in a Hansi Flick system, is because he's able to mix and blend the DNA of Barcelona, which is of course the tiki-taka, type of football, but he is quite a dynamic individual. He is still someone who will, try and get back and help out in the midfield. He drops into the midfield, into that number 8 position pretty well as well. So he's someone who can operate in all areas of the midfield, and I think he's comfortable in all of those areas. When we do look at his style of play, he's an energetic kind of midfielder is probably what I would say. And again, as I mentioned before, playing in that kind of attacking midfield behind Lewandowski, especially this season, he really has developed, since last season in terms of the amount of games, of course, that that he's currently playing. He's well on course, to potentially, depending on how the season ends, hit 50 games. Last season he played 42 games for Barcelona. So again, he's being trusted, by the manager. And I think when I think about him, he's quite a flair in it player. He's got the agility, he's got the attacking instincts. He can, as I mentioned, operate in central or attacking midfield, and usually he makes that run. He thrives on those quick turns, and he's someone who can progress the ball really, really well. And he's got quite sharp interplay, especially in those tight spaces. Again, showcasing that kind of Barcelona-esque type of football, with that close ball control. Even when he's under pressure, he can arrive late into the box, to be able to score. And sometimes he does go unnoticed when he does, do things like that. And I think, again, that's almost like a secret weapon, so to speak, for Barcelona. And I think more so than anything else, as I mentioned, yes, he mix and blends the new age of Barcelona, but his positional awareness and his eye for a through ball, that's what makes him a valuable creative kind of presence, for Barcelona. And I think when we're looking at his kind of weaknesses, I do think at times he does tend to take risks. And that could obviously, of course, lead to turnovers, and he can show that tenacity, in duels and stuff like that. But and his defensive positioning at times can be questioned, I would say. But ultimately, he's still a young player and he's still kind of improving. But when he is in that attacking third, I do think his positional awareness and his sense of I would say sense of urgency, especially in that kind of area. You can see it with here, under pressure, he is absolutely brilliant. And I do think, especially this season for Barcelona, I do think he's been really, really underrated in terms of the level of performances that he's been putting in for Barcelona and for Hansi Flick, especially in this kind of system where they do have like an attacking front four, and he is one of those, but he also helps out in the defensive aspect. How far can he go? Who knows? Who knows? I think that's just a question, we're going to just have to wait and see in regards to him. And I think it also is intriguing to see how Hansi Flick kind of plays it, especially, when we're looking at Barcelona's financial situation. Of course, we know, they don't really have the funds to really go out there and potentially get someone else, who could potentially play in that position. But as of right now, that's a good thing for most of these Barcelona players, because a lot of these guys are getting quite a lot of game time due to that fact and are able to excel and to shine. So let's wait and see. We'll definitely be able to see over the next couple of seasons. Hopefully, he can pick up a La Liga title, and Barcelona are going for a treble. So he could be having an absolutely historic season, and I genuinely believe his stock will rise once the season has ended, and we're going to see quite a lot of clubs, quite a lot of fan bases wanting a player like Fermin.